thought this was going to be easy for me. You all know the story a few years ago. I coach soccer. I like baseball, but I'm not a baseball coach. However, I heard of a story where public safety was kicking the kids off of the fields because their permits ended 5 minutes before the game was over. So I did a story in The Wire. I took some pictures. Two weeks later, I got a call from one of the parents on the baseball field telling me that it's the same thing. They're kicking the kids off of the field, and the kids are actually very upset, and some of them are crying because the game is not finished yet. And so I go and I take pictures. They zeroed in on me, public safety. 2 officers, Officer Toro is the main one, came on his bicycle straight to me across the field and tell me, "You have to leave." I said, "I'm taking pictures." He pushed me in my ribs really hard, and I said, "Don't touch me." He said, "You want me not to touch you? I'll show you what that means." He came and he handcuffs me. Being a reporter in my previous years, I took the camera and I gave it to a friend of mine. I said, "Keep filming." In the process, I told him, "My son is a minor. Can you get someone to attend to him?" He pushes me off of the field and he said, "That you brought that on you." He left my 9-year-old unattended. The kids on the field and the parents were very upset that I was arrested. They've seen that I have not done anything except taking pictures. They started following us. The more people crowd was starting to gather, the more the officers were getting upset. He pushes me into the old public safety next to the youth center. He handcuffs me to the wall. I tell him, "Look, I took an insulin an hour ago, and I'm diabetic, and I thought I was taking a couple of pictures and going back home. I feel very weak. Can I get something? I'll pay for it." He whispers in my ear, he said, "I am diabetic also. I'm going to wait until you pass out. I'm going to call an ambulance, and I'm going to drag your ASS into jail." I did not respond. I waited because I knew he was trying to get me upset. I waited a little bit. He stepped away. I said the same thing. He repeated the same thing out loud. He said, "I'm going to wait for you to pass out." And so one of the officers rolled their eyes, went and got me a soda. I collapsed. I was really weak. I drank it really fast and waited a few minutes. And then I took the phone with one hand and I called my wife because she was off the island and Luca was not even 10 yet. I called her to tell her he's outside by himself. And so I hung up the phone and I called The Wire, and I told them I'm being abused. When they heard that I was calling The Wire, Officer Toro twisted my arm. I could hear my arm crack, and there was bruises on my hands. And he took the phone and he silenced it. I said, "Look, I need to call my wife and the lawyer," and he said, "You can call them later." Anyway, I got out, and I have to tell you that with all of the incidents, since my incidents, people have been walking to me and telling me these outrageous stories. There's not one day that my son gets out of the house without me saying, "Be careful of public safety." I tell you, it's a sad day when I have to tell my son, "Be careful of public safety." That is not acceptable. That's not a community that we need to live in. We are a peaceful community. We do not need to be policed with the police without someone controlling them. It is time for us to change, and I would like to bring other witnesses to come and tell their stories.
Thank you so much, Adi. Next, Ike Mayhem. We have a whole list. You will see through this rally that there are numerous stories, all for different little minor incidences. Ike.
Thank you. My name is Ike Mayhem. I live in Westview. I've been on Roosevelt Island with my family since 1998. I'm a locomotive engineer for Amtrak. Maybe I've been your engineer if you've taken a train ride to Philadelphia, Baltimore, or Washington, D.C. I'm a proud member of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, a division of the Teamsters Union. My son Andrew was assaulted in 2008 by Public Safety Officer Raul Hernandez. Andrew's crime was to dare to open his mouth and object as Hernandez, who's nothing but a thug in a uniform, and Officer Brian Rivera were beating up his friend Thibaut Cotterans for no reason whatsoever as they simply walked down Main Street together. For saying, quote, Andrew said, "You can't do that," as Hernandez and Rivera pummeled his friend. Andrew, then 15 years old, was grabbed by Hernandez and flung full force into what was, thank God, a plexiglass window, leaving a huge dent, crack even. He was then detained, bruised, and traumatized in a PSD holding cell. No attempt was made to contact my wife or myself. I was eventually contacted by an island resident and friend and retrieved my quivering, disoriented 15-year-old son. For his zealous application of the Guerra Bryant style, Hernandez was subsequently promoted. There were several witnesses to what happened to Andrew and Thibaut, who we spoke with as we pursued legal options. They all confirmed that the fact that Andrew had done nothing illegal or wrong, and that Hernandez's subsequent concoction never put forward in a charge. Andrew was charged with nothing. That Andrew had physically interfered with the arrest of Thibaut was a pure manufactured fabrication, a big lie. One key eyewitness that we had was subsequently approached by Guerra and his lackeys and intimidated to back down. Now, the case of my son is a relatively minor one compared to some of what you've heard and will hear today. He received no serious permanent body or health damage. He was not formally arrested and charged, blackmailed into a plea bargain, or convicted. He thereby avoided the stigma and burden of a police record for future employment and personal self-esteem. But there are and were consequences. After the traumatic experience, Andrew, an easygoing, laid-back teenager, became more troubled, fearful of going out, more withdrawn into video games and other distractions, and neglectful of his schoolwork to the point of almost dropping out of high school. Now, Andrew is doing great today. He has turned a negative into a positive. He's at Lehman College getting good grades and working part-time, but our family went through some tough times. Today is a different reality. The case of Anthony Jones has opened up the floodgates, and the tide of truth and justice is pouring through. Now, maybe that's not the best metaphor after Hurricane Sandy, but I think you get my point. We no longer feel isolated and atomized. We feel growing unity and resolve. To rationalize their policies and practice, the Guerra Bryant regime spins wildly exaggerated tales of gangs and posses of super rude youth dissing the elderly and so on. This smear campaign is really a sign of weakness on the part of the Guerra Bryant regime and their apologists. A few people, maybe even a lot of people, may be fooled by this, but we will move forward and answer every smear with accurate, truthful facts. And I would ask you, when was the last time anyone was sent to the hospital with a punctured lung or pulled out of their bus and beaten, or any of the other horror stories you will hear today by a Roosevelt Island gang member? There are some residents, maybe even quite a few, when confronted with a story like that of Anthony, may fall into a default mentality along the lines of, well, he must have been doing something wrong. So be it. But opinion based on prejudice and cliche is not static or firm. We want everyone to consider the number of stories, consider the pattern, consider how long this has been going on. In a weak defensive statement issued yesterday, as the firestorm around his crumbling regime rages, Chief Guerra asked us not to, quote, rush to judgment. Mr. Guerra, you must be joking. The train of judgment on you and your leadership has left the station. Now, at this this late date, under the mounting pressure of what is becoming a movement on Roosevelt Island, Keith Guerra is trying to pose as Mr. Nice Guy. Well, as Abraham Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. And the number of people that Guerra and his defamers and his apologists and his thugs in uniform can fool at all is dwindling. There are simply too many busted heads, bruised bodies, intimidating phone calls, broken ribs, mothers with babies in cuffs to put the genie of our outrage and determination back in the bottle. We are going to stick with the facts and make extra sure that everything we say is accurate and truthful. And we are going to win many of those folks who think that they are against us, who are on the fence or are looking for some comfortable middle ground. We're going to win a lot of them over. We are going to counter the lies, the disinformation, and the character assassination. We will no longer be bottled up in bureaucracy, stalling tactics, diversions, and stonewalling. We are through with pleading and politely requesting and waiting for the so-called responsible authorities like the RIOC board to act, to do the right thing. They will act in response to we the people acting. We will always be civil and dignified and legal, but we are now acting as an independent force, and we are in a struggle mode. Now, I would like to close with a couple of quotes. I think it's appropriate as we commemorate and celebrate Black History Month this month. I'd like to invoke the spirit and words of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who said, "The whole history of the progress of human liberty shows that all concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters." Finally, again, in the spirit of Black History Month, let me quote from my generation's combination of Frederick Douglass and John Brown, the great Malcolm X, who said, "A chicken cannot produce a duck egg." The leadership of Guerra and Bryan cannot produce a public safety department that is civil, respectful, and protective of our constitutional and democratic rights. Remove Keith Guerra, remove Renee Bryan. We want them off our island now!
Thank you, Mr. Mayhem. Now we're going to hear from Kimberly Fernandez. Ferdinand.